This is the second part of my sermon on Matthew 9, verses 1 to 17. In this sermon, I am asking about Jesus. Who is he? And we just saw he is the forgiver of sins. Let's move to our next point from Matthew 9, verses 9 to 13. He is the seeker of the lost. Now, most of you have probably heard of the famous Dutch painter Rembrandt. In one of his most famous paintings, the title The Raising of the Cross, it's a picture of Jesus on the cross. He paints Jesus being lifted up on the cross. There's two criminals next to him, the Roman soldiers, the crowd around Jesus. And then if you look at one corner of the painting, among the crowds, you will see that Rembrandt painted a picture of himself, showing in this that he too recognised his desperate need of what Jesus did on that cross. Now, in a very similar way, in our passage, just after this magnificent picture of Jesus with the authority to forgive sins, Matthew, who wrote this gospel, drew a picture of himself, showing that he also desperately needed what Jesus had to give, the forgiveness of his sin. And Matthew here tells his own story of the day that Jesus came to him and said, "Matthew, follow me." Now we need to realise who Matthew was. He was despised among his own people because he was a tax collector. Tax collectors in those days were thieves. They often grew rich by overcharging others on their taxes. Men like Matthew were not even allowed to enter into the synagogue because they were considered by the leaders to be unclean. And so Matthew was an outcast. He was a bad man. And he tells in wonder of how Jesus stopped at his tax booth and said to him, "Matthew, follow me." He realised, like Rembrandt, that he desperately needed what Jesus had to offer. And he tells how immediately he rose, he left his old life behind and he followed Jesus. And how then he tells of how Jesus came to his home for a meal, and Matthew called all his friends over as well, many tax collectors and sinners, and they all ate a meal together with Jesus and his disciples. It was a wonderful day for Matthew because this day salvation had come to his home, and he, the unclean sinner, was forgiven by Jesus and he was clean. A huge load had dropped from his soul. But again, the Jewish leaders saw this. They were not following Jesus, remember. They were spying on him. And they said, look, he's not a holy man. He eats with sinners. And Jesus replied to these so-called religious leaders. He said, "What do you think religion is all about? Do you think it's all about the good people huddling up together? No, you've missed the whole point. The good news of God is all about saving sinners. I didn't come into this world to have a group hug with all the good people. Good people don't need me. It's the sick people who need me. It's sinners who need me. It's tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners of all sorts, and spiritually blind and deaf and dead. Those who are well, they have no need of a doctor, only those who are sick. And you so-called righteous leaders, you need to get back to your first principles. Church is not a big group hug where all the good people gather to offer all their good deeds to God, but the church is a place of healing. It's a place of mercy. It's a place of forgiveness. It's a place of restoration. It's a place where sick people are made well. And you so-called religious leaders, you dare judge me for meeting with sinners? I didn't come into the world to call the righteous, but for the very purpose to call sinners and give them new life. And for Matthew, how beautiful this was to his ears, because all the spiritual leadership had written him off, but Jesus didn't. No matter what he had done wrong, Jesus came to Matthew's door and Jesus said, "Matthew, follow me." And Matthew, the sinner, became one of the inmost circle, the 12 disciples. And he would go on one day to write this beautiful book, which we are learning so much from today. A book in which, like Rembrandt, Matthew took a little corner to paint himself in as one who is also privileged to be a beneficiary of what Jesus did on the cross. And his disciples learned another beautiful lesson about who Jesus is, not only the one to whom the winds and waves listen, not only the one who has the power to send them into hell, but also God himself in the flesh with the divine power to forgive sins. A God who himself entered into our history to call, to seek out, to draw to himself tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes and thieves. And it was his delight to gather them to himself and save them from their sins. And this same Jesus is knocking at your door too and mine. And he is saying, no matter who you are, come, pick up your mat, walk, follow me, and you will find peace for your soul. And so don't hesitate any longer. Come to him today. And the next song we're going to sing is the song Angels Rejoice over the saving of a sinner.